an appropriate place to hold such a meeting at such a critical time, because, of course, over the last 18 months, faced with the greatest threat to public health in a lifetime and with a pandemic of a scale not seen before in living memory, we've all battled to, as a society, to get and keep Covid-19 under control, and that battle remains today. We've faced the greatest challenges in peacetime, and the trade-offs between some of the most intrusive invasions of people's personal and economic lives set against the need to protect life itself. And with this extraordinary challenge faced by the whole of humanity, science held out one great hope, and that hope is vaccination. It's fitting that we're here at the Jenner Institute here in Oxford today at the start of this G7 health meeting, because it was Edward Jenner who first conceived of vaccination as the science of training the body's immune system and training the body's innate ability to fight disease so immunity can come without the suffering of that disease. Vaccination has saved more lives and prevented more misery than any other scientific endeavour. Just stop for a minute. Imagine a world without a vaccine. Imagine smallpox and measles running rife. Imagine where we'd be now, today, without a vaccine against Covid-19. And today I want to reflect on this life-saving endeavour and give my perspective on how we've got this far. The UK vaccination effort has, without doubt, been the best programme I've ever been involved with. It's been an honour. And I want to set out my thoughts why, and why in this country we've managed to make the progress that we have. Of course, this isn't over until it's over everywhere. And while today I'll concentrate on the UK and the rollout here, for which I'm responsible, we must also play our part in the global vaccination rollout, and I'll come on to the role that we're playing in that too. I'm very proud that we were able to deploy the first ever clinically approved COVID vaccine here in this country and delivered 60 million doses of 3 different vaccines into 39 million arms. As of midnight last night, I can confirm that we now have given a first dose of vaccine to 3/4 of the adult population of the United Kingdom. Lots of people stop me and ask me how we did all this. So I thought I'd take the time to set it out as I see it. I believe that the UK's vaccination success story is not an accident. It's a result of the approach that we took, decisions that we made, decisions that had been made before, and I want to look both at what worked and at what didn't work, because one of the things I've noticed in government is that when something goes well, people seem to think everything went well, and it didn't. I want to take a step back and reflect on this extraordinary project, the extraordinary team, the vaccine heroes, as I call them, and the extraordinary response of the public, because ultimately this project is a project that everybody is part of. And lots of people have said, lots of people who've been involved in the programme have set out the thing that they thought and they think is important in what made us make the progress that we have. But the truth is, it wasn't one thing. We had to get lots of things right. Now, for me, there are 4 lessons that I think we can take forward, and I'd like to take a bit of time to go through them today. The first lesson is to start early. As soon as we started responding to this crisis, we knew that a vaccine would be the best long-term way out. Even before the first COVID case arrived here in the UK, we'd started the work on how to develop and buy the vaccines that would ultimately make us safe. I vividly remember the first meeting that we had about a potential vaccine in January 2020. It was before COVID was even called COVID. And it was just after we'd cracked the genomic sequence of the virus. I was told in that meeting that a vaccine had never been developed before against any human coronavirus, that it would take at least 5 years to develop in normal times, and that a vaccine may never work. But my view was that this is too important to fail. And the attitude I had at that point was that the benefit of a vaccine would be so big that all the resources of the land should be at the disposal of the vaccines team. I hope that's how it felt to you. I specifically remember a then meek and somewhat timid professor turning to me when I asked how fast this could possibly be done. And he said that if everything went right, then the very best we could hope for would be 12 to 18 months. Who would have thought that just 11 months later, we'd be the first country in the world with a clinically authorized vaccine? And that professor, Professor Jonathan Van Tam, would be turning down strictly. JVT also is one of the heroes of the vaccine program, and we'll be meeting a few more later. The team that made this happen dared to believe, and we set to work to turn that belief into reality. So we started early. We put out a call for research in February. By March, we were supporting 6 different projects, including the Oxford vaccine, of course, alongside vital work on treatments, including the recovery trial, which led to the discovery that dexamethasone, the first proven treatment to reduce coronavirus mortality. These 2 projects alone, both out of Oxford in a large part, have already saved over 1 million lives globally. We asked the early questions. We had to be creative because no one had done this before. I remember asking, what will we regret not doing if we don't do it now? And the answers came back, legions of answers. We'll need freezers and syringes and glass vials. We'll need the best infrastructure for clinical trials. We'll need a supply chain, manufacturing, and a massive deployment operation. We knew that every day we took off the critical path to delivery meant thousands of lives and billions of pounds saved. Now, I was often told it was unlikely we'd get a vaccine until well into 2021. But I knew that if everything went right, we needed to be ready for deployment too, and ready for early deployment. Sometimes people have called me an optimist, or worse. And yes, I am an unapologetic optimist, but I'm a rational optimist. In this project, we had to be interested in the reasonable worst-case scenario, but we also had to be interested in the reasonable best-case scenario too, because that threw up its own challenges. Because if a vaccine did come good within 12 months, we needed to be ready to deploy it into people's arms. And I always believed that we could, especially with the power of the NHS. There's also another often under-acknowledged piece of work that we started early, which is about building trust. All the procurement and the logistics and the science would have been for nothing if we couldn't build people's trust in the vaccine and get people to come forward and roll up their sleeves. But Britain's incredibly high levels of confidence around the vaccine aren't an accident, and they weren't something that we could take for granted. We had to win trust. Trust is a crucial component of any major project. And the way to win trust is through openness and honesty. Being open about what we know and also about what we don't know. So, for instance, we were upfront from the start that there would be side effects and that we'd have to manage them. We levelled with people that vaccine supply is often lumpy and volumes differ from week to week. We were honest about the uncertainties. For instance, that it would take time to discover what impact new variants might have on any vaccine. It's not easy to stand at a podium like this and say that there are questions we cannot yet answer. Communicating uncertainty is hard, and no one had ever faced anything like this, because this was a novel disease about which we knew little and were and are learning all the time. The public get this. So in my view, the greatest respect you can give people is to give them the full picture, warts and all, right from the first moment. And I think this has paid off. Vaccine confidence and, crucially, uptake rates in the UK are among the highest in the world, and I'm very proud of that fact. We started early, too, on how we could make access to the vaccine fair. Now, I know that a few eyebrows were raised when I said that the film Contagion shaped my thinking about our vaccine programme. I should reassure Sir John Bell that it wasn't my primary source of advice, but when I watched that film, a penny did drop for me. Not just that the vaccine would be our way out of the pandemic, but that the power of the vaccine would be so great that we would have to think very hard about who to protect and in what order. I knew that some of the most difficult moments of the pandemic would not be before the vaccine was approved, but afterwards, when the scramble for vaccines had begun. Now, we Brits love queuing, and there's nothing more upsetting than someone jumping the queue. So again, we started planning early to make sure that this was fair, and we spent time preparing for how to organise the rollout in as fair a way as possible. The clinically advised prioritisation for getting vaccines in arms has been critical, I believe, in securing trust in the programme overall, because it's helped demonstrate that the system is fair. So we acted early to reassure people that in the finest tradition of the values of the NHS, which we share across this United Kingdom, vaccines would be given according to need, not ability to pay. Whether you're the Prime Minister or a Premier League footballer or the future King of England, you have to wait your turn, just like everyone else. Some people thought that it was strange that I didn't get the vaccine right at the start of the programme, and in fact I was criticised for this on the grounds that that would help to boost confidence. And yes, we did have to boost confidence, but we also had to build confidence that the programme was fair. So I waited my turn with everyone else, and together with the JCVI, who under the leadership of Professor Lim Wei Shen did so much to promote confidence in our vaccination programme, we announced back in August how we'd prioritise the rollout, months before we knew even if a vaccine would work, making clear that we'd prioritise the most vulnerable, like frontline health and care workers and residents in our care homes, and of course proceeding essentially on an age basis, because that is how the disease strikes. And we made sure that everyone understood where they were in the queue, and crucially why people were put in that order, so that we could protect the people most in need of protection and therefore save as many lives as possible. So the first lesson for me is to start early. The second is that at a time of crisis, you must draw on your strengths. In some areas of the pandemic response, we didn't have great strengths to start with. And in vaccines, we had some significant gaps too, like the capacity to manufacture onshore and enough people to deploy a vaccine at scale. But we had and we have some serious strengths, and we've relied on them as much as we possibly could, and we've put weight on these great strengths that we have as a country. First, we have a universal healthcare system with a trusted brand in the NHS. The NHS, under the steadfast leadership of Sir Simon Stevens, who has done a remarkable role in this pandemic, has performed with distinction, and it's deserved every plaudit that has come its way. Without this common, trusted health system across the UK and its universal nature embedded in every community in the land, and its experience at running the flu vaccine programme every year, which delivers typically 15 million doses, we couldn't have delivered such a rapid and efficient rollout. And next, of course, and it's appropriate standing here in Oxford, we couldn't have delivered such a rapid and a powerful response without our scientific strength. And this scientific strength, we must remember, has been built up over centuries. It's the reason that the UK has this great scientific capability is not because of recent decisions, it's because of consistent decisions for years and years and years. The strength is built up over generations, and we must invest in it. In 2015, for instance, we set up the UK Vaccines Network, chaired by Professor Chris Whitty, in response to the Ebola pandemic in West Africa, to invest in developing vaccines against unknown future threats. And thanks to this work, we invested in a candidate for MERS, which was adapted to become the underlying technology for the Oxford vaccine. And the lesson from this is that you need a broad range of research, because you never know which bit of science is going to save you next time. We had the infrastructure on which to build some of the most successful clinical trials, not just because we're home to some of the best universities and the best researchers, but because we did everything in our power to support clinical trials in the funding from, for instance, the National Institute for Health Research, another team of vaccine heroes, and, of course, the NHS. And we chose not to prejudge their outcomes, no matter how tempting that was at the time. Backing clinical trials like this isn't empty rhetoric. I know this for myself. The pressures to end trials early before they'd properly read out is intense in the heat of a crisis. But we didn't. We backed the science. We built on what we learned from the recovery programme, the recovery trial, and in July we created the Vaccine Research Registry, which is a register for people who are ready and willing to take part in large-scale clinical trials for Covid-19. And over 500,000 people have signed up on the NHS website, which I think, frankly, is amazing. And this is 500,000 people, remember, who are willing to take an unknown vaccine in order to save other people's lives. Many vaccine manufacturers have told us that they found this registry invaluable in allowing rapid recruitment for clinical trials. And so overall, we try to promote this supportive environment that means that the majority of vaccine candidates, including Oxford and Valneva and Novavax, have been trialled here in the UK. And this shows the prize when you get the research right and when you double down on your strengths. I'd like to pay tribute here to another vaccine hero, Professor Chris Whitty, because he has been involved in this drive since before the start, and he has driven the research programme that has saved lives right across the world. Another team who are vaccine heroes are our first-rate regulators. Throughout the crisis, the MHRA, under the brilliant stewardship of June Rain, has excelled and been a global model for how to regulate. And in fact, Andrew Pollard was taking me around the Oxford science labs earlier today and explaining that each time he mentioned the regulator, you mentioned that, of course, our regulator here, the MHRA, is dynamic and flexible and helps science to proceed. They're everything that a health secretary could want. They're independent, rigorously independent. They don't waver when it comes to upholding strong standards. And they're out there in public as a trusted voice to respond to concerns, and they're agile and they're responsive, and from the get-go they're committed to me. They do everything in their power to remove barriers on the critical path. I remember June saying to me at the start of this pandemic, "We'll go as fast as we safely can, Matt." And that's exactly what they've done, with the emphasis on fast and safe. In short, they regulate for safety, not bureaucracy. For example, they invented a process so they could look at clinical trials data through a rolling review as the trials went on, rather than waiting for a final submission of a package of data at the end, which takes months off the critical path for regulatory approval without compromising on scrutiny. The lesson I take away from this is the quality of our regulators gives the UK a real competitive advantage and saves lives. The MHRA has shown that how innovation and regulation are not mutually exclusive, and I know that regulators all around the world are looking to learn from the MHRA and the pivotal part that they played in our response. One other of our great strengths as a nation I want to touch on is the strength of our union. Just as we're adopting a UK-wide approach to expanding, for instance, testing capacity and procuring PPE for each corner of the UK, this vaccination programme is for the whole UK. We negotiated and bought vaccines for the whole country. We allocated them according to need. We worked with the NHS, with devolved administrations, local councils everywhere. We called upon the logistical heft of the British armed forces to get them into arms. Again, this didn't happen by accident. The devolved administrations, of course, are run by different political parties. And although health is devolved, the virus doesn't respect administrative boundaries. So I was determined to overcome political differences so we could deliver for citizens wherever they lived across the country. Like everyone, I have come to love Zoom. But it wasn't easy getting this UK-wide approach. And right at the start, last March, before we entered lockdown, I decided to go and see each of the devolved health ministers face to face. And it was so important that we all got on the same page about the importance of this project. So, although life was pretty hectic last March, I took 24 hours to fly to Edinburgh, to Belfast, to Cardiff, to sit down with each health minister. And that 24 hours has proved invaluable in strengthening those relationships. And it's one of the most useful 24 hours in the pandemic. And since then, we've had a call every single week, the four of us. And frankly, it's sometimes been a bit like group therapy. The importance of the union can has never been clearer than in the UK vaccination effort.